Alright guys, what is up? And today I'm coming to the deck profile on my burn deck that I took to a local tournament and got second place out of about maybe 5 or 6 people. I forget how many people were there. Just a small tournament, but it did fairly well. The decks I played against were the first round I beat Zombies 2-0, and then did the same against Heradic Dragon Rulers. And as you can see, it plays Lava Golem. The guy got really salty whenever I played Lava Golem. Took his Draco Sack and his Heradic Dragon King of a Tomb. So he just kind of had Lava Golem and 2 Mecha Fan Beast tokens sitting there. And then after that, played Cyber Dragons, and he almost got me the second duel. But he crashed into Marshmallow with the Cyber and Dragon he brought out with Power Bond, so it didn't really work out too well. And then I lost 2-0 against Burning Abyss, but came really close both times. And I apologize for any background noise you might hear besides the usual aquarium filters I have, but right now there's a thunderstorm outside and it's pretty bad. But I just feel like I'm going to go ahead and do this deck profile because, as you guys know, my cards got stolen. This is the only deck I could really throw together cheaply and have it do somewhat consistently, but I am working on getting together a few more decks I'm going to show you guys later once I have them put together, but no spoilers quite yet, but I will show them once they're done. And I've got the consistency just right and all that good stuff. And I also have somebody that offered to help replace some of my decks. And I asked them to help me replace Harpies, because originally I had deck lists for them, but I was on Yugioh Pro for my Android. But I switched phones over to an HTC One, and for some reason Yugioh Pro isn't showing up on the App Store, so I can't really access the deck list right now. But, yeah. But now, enough chit-chat, let's get into the decks. So first off, played 2 copies of Lava Golem. This guy's a really good card. I actually thought about putting him at 3 a few times, but then I feel like 2's enough, because in some cases I would actually draw into 2 of these guys in my opening hand. I actually did that a couple times in the tournament. But if you don't know what Lava Golem does, pretty old school monster. You tribute 2 of your opponent's monsters to special summon it, and then they take 1,000 damage during each of their standby phase. And this card combo is really good with Gravity Bind, or if you have some sort of wall that they can't really get over. So you can basically just sit there and stall on a lot of combos and basically do what your burn deck's supposed to do, just stall and burn your opponent to death. But really, really good card, but I'd play against that too. And then of course I see a lot of people only playing one of them in their burn decks, but I really like this card, so I put it at 3, but 3 copies of Marshmallow. Really, really annoying card that a lot of decks just really have trouble getting over that don't really have that free pop-a-card effect. If you don't know what this guy does, I'm going to explain some of these cards to you guys who might not know it, or know what the card does, but you set him, what you're really supposed to do with this guy is set him in face-down defense. If your opponent attacks him and he's in face-down defense position, your opponent takes 1,000 damage, and he can't be destroyed by battle. So, usually what I would do is I would just sit on this guy, and then my opponent would crash into it with Lava Golem, and then they'd just sit there and stall and take damage. So, really, really nice card. And then 2 copies of Princess of Tsurugi. She's a flip effect, and your opponent would take 500 for each spell and trap they have on the field. So if your opponent likes to really fill up the back row on their first couple turns, this card's really nice and really racks up. And after that, originally I played 2 Scapegoat in this deck because I thought you could use the sheep tokens and I would use them to go into Lionheart. But apparently you can't do that, so I had to replace the Scapegoat cards with 2 Fencing Fire Ferrets. Really kind of cool that this card got reprinted in the Mega Timbo. If you don't know what it does, when it's destroyed, it's sent to the graveyard, so it's either by battle or by card effect. You can destroy 1 face-up monster your opponent controls, and they lose 500, so you get to get rid of some problematic monster and inflict 500 damage. And that is it for our small monster count. Not really a whole lot. A lot of spells and traps this deck, but the spell I really found just kind of making this deck on mine. Randomly searched it up, found it, and thought this card was really stupid that nobody really plays. But Dark Room of Nightmare. It's a continuous spell, and it says, each time your opponent takes damage from a card effect, except Dark Room of Nightmare, inflict 300 damage to your opponent. So you have a couple of these on the field, or mainly just 1. I usually try to keep 1 on the field, because there's a lot of continuous spells and traps on the field. So this really racks up after a while with different cards like Marshmallow and Lava Golem and a few others in this deck I'll get into later. But really, really good card, and glad I finally got 3 copies of this. And the next 2 copies of Dark Snake Syndrome. This card can potentially hurt you, and in some cases it did hurt me. Came pretty close, but I pulled out a combo and managed to get around it. Because you can really tip the scale really easily with this card. Your opponent just thinks, oh, Dark Snake Syndrome, it'll kill both of us at the same time if you draw this in your opening hand. But if you drop Dark Room of Nightmare, or have some other burn effect waiting, then you basically just have your opponent saying, oh, you can't stall, you have to get rid of this, and get rid of this really quick, and they end up using the resources to get rid of that pretty quickly. After that, 2 copies of Burning Land. This does hurt you, but really, again, helps tip the scale against your opponent who just thinks he'll just stall and kill both of us at the same time, but inflicts 500 points of damage to the turn player. In that case, I usually like to combo this with Dark Room and Nightmare, so really nice. The next 3 copies of Chain Energy. Really old card, and I really like the artwork on this. I'm glad I finally got 3 more copies of this put in the deck. But this does hurt you. Again, a lot of these decks, or all of these cards in this deck can potentially hurt you if you decide to play this build. But that doesn't really hurt too much because your opponent, in most cases, doesn't really have a response for a lot of the really annoying cards in this deck. But you basically pay 500 life points per card to set a card on the field from your hand. So, really, really annoying. So if they want to try and get around it, they have to at least pay 500 to drop like MST or something to get rid of it. And then 2 copies of Toll, just pay 500 life points per monster to attack, which you don't really attack in this deck. But your opponent kind of has to. And then just for a little bit of extra back row destruction, 3 copies of MST. And that is it for our spells, and now for the traps. Since it is semi-limited, only allowed to play 2 copies of Ojama Trio because this card really stops a lot of decks really easily. A lot of people don't really expect this card, but whenever they do see it and read its effect, they just get really frustrated. Because what it does is you special summon 3 Ojama tokens to your opponent's side of the field, and they can't be attributed, and you inflict 300 points of damage to your opponent for each whenever a token is destroyed. So, you can't really attribute these tokens to the Lava Golem, but you just basically fill out 3 out of your opponent's 5 monster card slots, so it really stops a lot of decks like Burning Abyss. He was somewhat frustrated with the Ojama tokens because he couldn't really get out a lot of his Burning Abyss monsters. Of course, he did go into Tour Guide and did get off of his searches and whatnot, all those little combos they do. But this really did hurt a lot of decks that relied heavily on special summoning at least 3 monsters, so this really stopped them really easily. And then, really good card against the Cyber Dragon matchup, Magic Cylinder, because nobody really plays this card a lot anymore, but it's a really nice techie card I like to use. They get out their big beaters, negate the attack, and then they basically attack themselves. And then 3 copies of just Desserts. You really got to play this card right, because sometimes your opponent may special summon something else, you can't immediately flip it. If they're bound to overlay, ask them to give you a chance to flip this, and you flick 500 for each of the monster on their side of the field. But 3 copies, if you chain off more than one of these, it really hurts players really easily. And then since it's limited, 1 copy of Ceasefire, but it's 500 points for each effect monster on the field, not just one player's side. And then 2 copies of Zone of the Spirit, nice little wall. If your opponent wants to attack it, then they have to basically do damage to their life points equal to the attack of the monster that destroys it. So, really nice. And then just for a little bit of consistency, but not a whole lot because this deck doesn't exactly need it. It's just a really slow deck, but that's how it's supposed to work. 3 copies of Jargri, just chain these off of each other, draw a card, plain and simple. Then 1 copy of Gravity Bind. Originally I played this at 2, but I bumped it back down to 1 because it really doesn't hurt a lot of decks. Because a lot of decks are now focusing on level 3 to lower monsters. But a lot of higher level monsters, again in the Cyber Dragon matchup, he had a Chimera Tech and Twin Dragon, but he couldn't really attack because of Gravity Bind. So, the combo is really good for Lava Golem. And then lastly, just for any other, just to be annoying, or a little more protection, 2 copies of Mirror Force. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below this deck. Really glad I finally got this finished and pretty proud of how well it did, but I also feel really bad for how well it did because burn decks are one of those, what people call solitaire decks, because you're basically just shuffling your cards and watching your opponent cry about it. But it's just a fun little deck to play. Fairly consistent with what it does, and that's just be annoying and make your opponent pay to play. That's basically how it works. But again, I do have a couple more decks I'm working on right now, and they're almost done, to be honest. One of them I need about 8 more cards to finish it, and then the other one I'm just going to order everything online to finish it, and then I have a fusion. That's a hint. But it's not Shadal's, because I honestly do not like Shadal's at all. So it's another deck that uses fusions, but you guys will see the decks whenever they're done. But I hope you guys enjoyed this deck profile. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I will catch you guys later.